The lunch tray clattered against the metal table as Lieutenant Sarah Martinez set it down in the crowded Navy base cafeteria. The noise mixed with dozens of conversations, the scraping of chairs, and the occasional burst of laughter from various tables filled with service members. She had been looking forward to this moment all morning. Finally, a chance to sit down and eat without rushing between meetings or training sessions. Sarah chose a table near the large windows that overlooked the training grounds. Through the glass, she could see new recruits running drills in the afternoon sun. Their movements were still awkward, not yet refined by months of practice and discipline. She remembered her own early days, when everything felt impossible, and every challenge seemed designed to break her spirit. As she unwrapped her sandwich, Sarah noticed the cafeteria had grown more crowded than usual. A group of Navy SEALs had just entered, their presence immediately noticeable. They moved with that particular confidence that comes from knowing you're part of an elite unit. Their uniforms were crisp, their posture perfect, and their conversation carried the easy camaraderie of people who had been through extraordinary challenges together. The SEAL team grabbed their food and looked around for seating. The cafeteria was nearly full, with most tables occupied by various military personnel. Sarah watched as their eyes scanned the room, clearly searching for a place to sit together as a group. She had seen this many times before. Elite units preferred to stick together during downtime, maintaining their tight bonds even during casual moments. One of the SEALs, a tall man with broad shoulders and close-cropped hair, pointed toward the area where Sarah was sitting. There were a few empty tables nearby, and the location offered good visibility of the entire cafeteria. Sarah returned her attention to her lunch, not thinking much of their choice to sit in her general area. The SEALs settled at the table directly behind her. Their conversation was loud enough that she could hear bits and pieces without trying to eavesdrop. They talked about upcoming training exercises, weekend plans, and friendly complaints about their commanding officers. It was the kind of casual military talk that happened in every cafeteria on every base around the world. Sarah had almost finished her sandwich when she heard her name mentioned. Not her full name, but someone had clearly noticed the nameplate on her uniform. She tried to ignore it and continue eating, but the conversation behind her was becoming increasingly audible and pointed in her direction. "Hey, Martinez," came a voice from the SEAL table. It was the tall one who had pointed out the seating area earlier. "You're that lieutenant from the logistics department, right?" Sarah turned around to face the speaker. His tone wasn't particularly friendly, but it wasn't openly hostile either. She had encountered this type of interaction before. Military personnel from different departments sizing each other up, often based on assumptions about what different roles meant in terms of actual capability and experience. "Yes, that's correct," Sarah replied evenly. She had learned long ago that responding with calm professionalism was usually the best approach in these situations. Getting defensive or aggressive rarely led anywhere productive. The SEAL, his nameplate read Patterson, leaned back in his chair with a smirk. "Logistics, huh? Must be nice having a cushy desk job while the rest of us do the real work." His teammates chuckled, clearly enjoying what they saw as good-natured ribbing. Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with these moments. She had worked incredibly hard to earn her position and rank, but there was always someone ready to dismiss her contributions based on their assumptions about what her job entailed. She took a deep breath before responding. "Every role in the military serves an important purpose," she said, maintaining her calm tone. "We all contribute to the mission in different ways." Patterson's smirk widened. Sure. But let's be honest here. There's a difference between pushing papers and actually putting your life on the line for your country. I mean, when's the last time you saw real combat? When's the last time you had to make life-or-death decisions in the field?" The conversation at nearby tables had begun to quiet down as people sensed tension developing. Sarah was aware that their exchange was attracting attention, which was the last thing she wanted. She preferred to handle these situations quietly and professionally without creating a scene. "I understand that different military roles involve different types of challenges and risks," Sarah replied carefully. She could feel dozens of eyes on her now, waiting to see how this would play out. "Different challenges?" Patterson laughed, and his teammates joined in. "Come on, Lieutenant. You sit behind a desk making sure supplies get delivered on time. That's important work, don't get me wrong, but it's not exactly the same as what we do. We're the ones who actually fight the wars. We're the ones who put everything on the line." Sarah could feel her patience beginning to wear thin, but she maintained her composure. She had been in the military long enough to know that losing her temper would only make things worse. Instead, she simply nodded and started to gather her things, planning to leave rather than escalate the situation. "Leaving already?" Patterson called out as she stood up. I guess the conversation got a little too intense for someone used to the safety of an office environment. This drew more laughter from his table and caught the attention of even more people in the cafeteria. Sarah paused, her back still turned to the seal table. She could walk away right now and avoid any further confrontation. That would be the safe, professional thing to do. But something in Patterson's tone, the dismissive arrogance, the assumption that her service was somehow less valuable than his, made her reconsider. She turned back around to face the table of seals. The cafeteria had grown much quieter now, with most conversations paused as people watched to see what would happen next. Sarah could see curiosity, amusement, and concern on various faces throughout the room. "You know what, Petty Officer Patterson?" Sarah said, using his rank deliberately. She had noticed his insignia and wanted to make it clear that she outranked him, even if he seemed to have forgotten that detail. "You're absolutely right that different military roles involve different types of service and sacrifice." Patterson's expression shifted slightly. He had clearly noticed her emphasis on his rank and the implication that she, as a lieutenant, was his superior officer. But his smirk remained, suggesting he wasn't backing down from his position. "That's right," he said, "and some types of service require a lot more courage and skill than others. I mean, no offense, but coordinating supply deliveries isn't exactly the same as conducting covert operations in hostile territory." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely correct about that. Coordinating supply deliveries is very different from conducting covert operations." She paused, seeming to consider her next words carefully. "Just like coordinating supply deliveries is very different from the work I was doing before I transferred to logistics." Something in her tone made Patterson's smirk falter slightly. A few people at nearby tables leaned forward, sensing that the conversation was about to take an unexpected turn. "Oh, really?" Patterson said, trying to maintain his confident tone. "And what exactly were you doing before you got your nice, safe desk job?" Sarah smiled for the first time since the conversation began. It wasn't a warm smile, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the kind of smile that suggested she knew something that others didn't. "Well," she said, speaking clearly enough for everyone in the nearby area to hear, "before I transferred to logistics, I spent 8 years in Army Special Operations. Most of that time was with the 75th Ranger Regiment, but I also did 2 tours with Delta Force." The effect of her words was immediate and dramatic. Patterson's mouth fell open slightly, his smirk completely disappearing. His teammates stopped laughing and stared at Sarah with new expressions of surprise and respect. Throughout the cafeteria, people who had been watching the exchange began to murmur to each other, clearly shocked by this revelation. "I spent a total of 6 years in combat zones," Sarah continued, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. "Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and a few places I can't mention by name. I was part of direct action raids, hostage rescue operations, and deep reconnaissance missions. I earned 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star with Valor, and a Silver Star before I decided to transition to a support role." The cafeteria had become almost completely silent. Even tables that had been across the room were now quiet, with people straining to hear what Sarah was saying. Patterson looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. "The reason I transferred to logistics," Sarah went on, "wasn't because I wanted a cushy desk job. It was because after 8 years of combat operations, I wanted to serve my country in a different way. I wanted to use my experience to help ensure that other service members, including elite units like yours, have the supplies, equipment, and support they need to complete their missions successfully." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "You're right that coordination and supply management doesn't require the same type of courage as direct combat operations, but it does require a deep understanding of what combat operations actually entail, what equipment is truly necessary, and how to prioritize resources when lives are on the line. My background gives me that understanding." Patterson had gone completely red in the face. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. His teammates were looking anywhere but at Sarah, clearly embarrassed by their friend's assumptions and behavior. "Now," Sarah said, her tone becoming slightly warmer, "I want you to understand something. I'm not telling you this to embarrass you or to prove that I'm better than you. I'm telling you because I want you to remember something important. You never really know someone's story just by looking at their current assignment or their uniform." She gestured around the cafeteria. "There are people in this room who have experiences and backgrounds that might surprise you. That young corporal over there might be a decorated combat medic. That staff sergeant by the door might be a former Green Beret. That captain near the windows might have spent years doing intelligence work in dangerous places." Patterson finally found his voice, though it came out much quieter than before. "Lieutenant, I didn't know. I apologize for making assumptions about your service." Sarah nodded, accepting his apology. "I understand how easy it is to make assumptions. We all do it sometimes. But in the military, we're all supposed to be on the same team, working toward the same goals. When we dismiss each other based on our current assignments or our ranks, we miss opportunities to learn from each other and to work together more effectively." The tension in the cafeteria was beginning to ease, but people were still listening intently. This had turned from an embarrassing confrontation into something like an impromptu lesson about respect and assumptions. "Can I ask you something, Petty Officer Patterson?" Sarah said. "Of course, ma'am," Patterson replied, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "How long have you been a SEAL?" 4 years, ma'am." "And how did you feel when people made assumptions about your capabilities before you proved yourself in training and operations?" Patterson considered this for a moment. "It was frustrating. Ma'am, I knew I had what it took, but I had to prove it over and over again." "Exactly," Sarah said. "And I'm sure you've seen highly capable people dismissed or underestimated because they didn't fit someone's mental image of what a warrior should look like." "Yes, ma'am, I have." Sarah smiled again, and this time it was genuinely warm. "Then you understand why it's important to give people the benefit of the doubt and to ask questions before making judgments." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of someone clearing their throat loudly. Sarah turned to see a colonel approaching their area of the cafeteria. Everyone in the vicinity immediately stood at attention, including Sarah and all the SEALs. "As you were," the colonel said, gesturing for everyone to relax. "I couldn't help but overhear the conversation over here. Lieutenant Martinez, is it?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. "I've been meaning to introduce myself. I'm Colonel Thompson, base commander. I've been reviewing your work in logistics, and I have to say, the improvements you've made to our supply chain efficiency have been remarkable. Response times are down by 30%. And waste has been reduced by almost half." Sarah felt a flush of pride, but kept her expression professional. "Thank you, sir. I've been working to apply some lessons learned from field experience to optimize our processes." "Well, it shows," Colonel Thompson said. Then he turned to address the wider group. This is actually a perfect teachable moment for everyone here. Lieutenant Martinez represents exactly the kind of career progression that makes our military stronger. Combat experience followed by specialized expertise in critical support roles. We need people who understand both the sharp end of military operations and the complex logistics that make those operations possible. He paused, looking around at the assembled faces. Too often we fall into the trap of thinking that only certain types of military service count or matter. But every single person in this room contributes to our mission. The success of elite units like our SEAL teams depends absolutely on having excellent intelligence, logistics, medical support, communications, maintenance, and dozens of other specialties. Colonel Thompson's attention returned to Patterson. "Petty Officer, what's your name?" "Patterson, sir. SEAL Team 4. "Petty Officer Patterson, I want you to think about your last deployment. How would that mission have gone if your equipment hadn't been properly maintained, if your intelligence had been inaccurate, if your extraction hadn't been coordinated perfectly, if your medical support hadn't been standing by?" Patterson stood straighter. "It wouldn't have succeeded, sir. We depend on all those support elements." "Exactly right. And the people providing that support aren't lesser warriors, they're essential teammates. Many of them, like Lieutenant Martinez, have combat experience that informs how they approach their support roles." The colonel looked around the cafeteria one more time. "I hope everyone here takes this lesson to heart. We're stronger when we respect each other's contributions and learn from each other's experiences. Carry on." As Colonel Thompson walked away, the normal noise level of the cafeteria gradually returned. But the atmosphere around Sarah's area remained somewhat subdued. People were clearly still processing what had happened. Patterson approached Sarah as she prepared to leave. "Lieutenant, I want to apologize again. What I said was out of line, and frankly, it was stupid. I let my ego get in the way of basic respect and professionalism." "I appreciate that," Sarah said. "And I hope you understand that I wasn't trying to humiliate you. Sometimes these conversations need to happen so we can all learn something." "Absolutely, ma'am. And if it's okay with you, I'd like to ask you something." "Go ahead. Would you be willing to talk with our team sometime about your combat experience? I think we could learn a lot from your perspective, especially about transitioning between different types of roles in the military." Sarah considered this. "I'd be open to that. I think it could be beneficial for both sides. I'm always interested in understanding the current challenges that operational units face, so I can better support them from the logistics side." "That would be great, ma'am. I'll talk to our team leader and see if we can set something up." As Sarah finally left the cafeteria, she reflected on how the day had unfolded. She hadn't planned to share her background with a room full of people, and she certainly hadn't expected to have such an intense conversation with a Navy SEAL. But perhaps it had been necessary. Walking back to her office, Sarah thought about the assumptions people made about her every day. Some saw her current assignment and assumed she had chosen an easy path through military service. Others saw her rank and assumed she had climbed the ladder through politics rather than merit. Very few people knew the full story of her journey from combat operations to logistics coordination. But maybe that was changing. Word would spread about what had happened in the cafeteria today. People would start to see her differently, and perhaps more importantly, they might start to think differently about their colleagues and teammates. As she settled back into her afternoon work, Sarah felt a sense of satisfaction. Not because she had embarrassed Patterson or proven herself superior, but because she had potentially helped create a more respectful and collaborative environment on the base. That, she reflected, was just as important as any mission she had completed in her combat years. 3 days after the cafeteria incident, Sarah Martinez was deep in inventory reports when her office door received a sharp knock. She looked up from her computer screen, where spreadsheets of ammunition counts and equipment requisitions had been demanding her attention for the past 2 hours. "Come in," she called out, expecting to see one of her logistics team members with another question about supply schedules. Instead, Petty Officer Patterson stepped through the doorway, followed by 3 other Navy SEALs she recognized from the cafeteria encounter. They all looked somewhat uncomfortable, standing stiffly in her small office space that was designed for desk work rather than military formations. "Lieutenant Martinez," Patterson began, "I hope we're not interrupting anything critical. We were hoping we could speak with you for a few minutes." Sarah saved her work and gestured toward the small seating area in the corner of her office. "Please have a seat. What can I do for you?" The 4 SEALs arranged themselves in the available chairs, with Patterson taking the lead as their apparent spokesperson. Sarah could sense they had discussed this visit beforehand and had chosen him to handle most of the talking, probably because he had been the one involved in the original confrontation. "Ma'am, we've been talking a lot since what happened in the cafeteria," Patterson said, "about assumptions, respect, and honestly about how much we don't know about the people we work alongside every day." Sarah nodded, encouraging him to continue. "We realized that we never properly introduced ourselves or took the time to understand what different departments actually do on this base," he went on. "We've been operating in our own bubble, focused only on our team and our missions." One of the other SEALs, whose nameplate read Rodriguez, leaned forward. "Lieutenant, we were hoping you might be willing to help us understand something. You mentioned that your logistics experience helps you better support operational units. Could you explain what that means in practical terms?" Sarah was intrigued by their genuine curiosity. She had expected them to be defensive or to avoid her after the cafeteria incident, but instead they seemed to be making a sincere effort to learn. "I'd be happy to explain," she said. "Let me give you a concrete example. Last month, your team requested a specific type of night vision equipment for an upcoming training exercise. The standard requisition process would have taken 2 weeks to fulfill that request." "Right," said another SEAL, whose nameplate showed Chen. "We ended up having to modify our training plan because of the delay." "Actually, you didn't," Sarah said with a slight smile. "I expedited that request and had the equipment delivered in 4 days. But the reason I was able to do that effectively wasn't just because I know how to push paperwork through the system faster." She turned to her computer and pulled up a file. "When I reviewed your equipment request, I noticed you were asking for Generation 3 intensifier tubes, which are excellent for most night operations. But I also noticed that your training scenario involved a simulated urban environment with mixed lighting conditions." The SEALs exchanged glances, clearly interested in where this was going. "Based on my field experience in similar environments, I knew that Generation 3 tubes can actually be problematic in urban settings with intermittent artificial lighting. The constant adjustment between light and dark can cause eye fatigue and reduce overall effectiveness." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "We did notice some issues with that during the exercise. The guys complained about headaches and difficulty transitioning between lit and unlit areas." "Exactly," Sarah said. "So instead of just filling your original request, I included some newer digital night vision units that handle mixed lighting conditions much better. I also added some backup equipment in case you wanted to compare performance." Chen looked impressed. "Those digital units were game changers for that exercise. We assumed they were just extras that got thrown in." "That's the kind of practical application I'm talking about," Sarah explained. "Understanding equipment from a user perspective, not just from a procurement perspective. When you've actually had to rely on gear in life or death situations, you develop insights about what works, what doesn't, and what little details can make a huge difference." Patterson was taking notes on a small pad. "Ma'am, could you give us another example? This is exactly the kind of information we need to understand better." Sarah thought for a moment. "All right, here's one that might surprise you. 2 weeks ago, your team leader submitted a request for additional ammunition for close quarters training. Standard procedure would be to simply provide the requested quantities of the specified ammunition type. That seems straightforward, Rodriguez said. On the surface, yes. But when I looked at the training scenario description and the ammunition request together, I noticed something. You were requesting standard full metal jacket rounds for close-quarters battle training in a simulated ship environment. The fourth SEAL, whose nameplate read Johnson, suddenly looked very interested. "Oh, I think I see where you're going with this." Sarah nodded. "Exactly. FMJ rounds in a confined space like a ship compartment create significant overpenetration risks, not just for the immediate target, but for anyone in adjacent compartments or behind thin bulkheads." "So what did you do?" Patterson asked. "I contacted your team leader and suggested we also include some frangible rounds designed specifically for close-quarters scenarios. These rounds break apart on impact, reducing overpenetration while maintaining stopping power." Chen was shaking his head in amazement. "That's why Commander Williams suddenly changed our ammunition loadout for that exercise. We were wondering where that decision came from." "Your commander is excellent at tactical decision-making," Sarah said. "But he appreciated having someone in logistics who could flag potential issues before they became problems during training." Johnson leaned back in his chair. "Lieutenant, I have to admit, we never thought about logistics as a tactical consideration. We always saw it as just getting us the stuff we need." "That's a common perspective," Sarah said, "and it's understandable. When you're focused on mission execution, you shouldn't have to worry about supply chain details, but the reality is that logistics can make or break operational success." She pulled up another file on her computer. "Let me show you something that might illustrate this point. This is a mission analysis from my time with Delta Force. We had a high-priority target in a remote location, and intelligence indicated we had a narrow window for the operation." The SEALs gathered around her computer screen as she brought up a detailed map and timeline. The original plan called for a direct assault followed by immediate extraction via helicopter. Standard loadout, standard procedures. But when I looked at the logistics requirements, I identified several potential problems. "Such as?" Rodriguez asked. "First, the target location was at high altitude in a desert environment. That meant our helicopters would be operating near their maximum performance envelope, especially for the extraction phase when they'd be carrying additional personnel." Sarah pointed to calculations on the screen. "When I ran the numbers, I realized that if we loaded our standard equipment plus the expected number of detainees plus contingency supplies, we would be overweight for a safe extraction at that altitude and temperature." Patterson whistled softly. "That could have been catastrophic." "Right. So I worked with the mission planners to redesign our equipment loadout. We switched to lighter-weight alternatives for several items, pre-positioned some supplies at intermediate locations, and arranged for a larger extraction helicopter to be on standby." "Did the mission go according to plan?" Chen asked. "Actually, no. We encountered unexpected resistance and had to hold the target location longer than planned. We ended up with more detainees than expected, and one of our team members was wounded and needed medical evacuation." Sarah highlighted different elements on the screen as she continued. "Because we had planned for weight restrictions and arranged backup extraction assets, we were able to successfully evacuate everyone without compromising the mission. If we had gone with the original logistics plan, we would have been in serious trouble." The room was quiet for a moment as the SEALs absorbed this information. "Ma'am," Johnson finally said, "I think we owe you an apology that goes beyond what happened in the cafeteria. We've been treating logistics like it's separate from our operational world, when clearly it's an integral part of mission success." "You don't need to apologize for that," Sarah said. "It's natural to focus on your area of expertise. But you're right that everything is connected. Good logistics isn't just about delivering supplies on time. It's about understanding how those supplies will be used and what challenges the end users might face." Rodriguez had been thinking while the others talked. "Lieutenant, Can I ask you about the transition from combat operations to logistics? That must have been a significant change. Sarah nodded. It was challenging in ways I didn't expect. In combat operations, you get immediate feedback about whether your decisions were right or wrong. In logistics, sometimes you don't know for months whether your planning prevented problems or created them. What made you want to make that transition? Patterson asked. Burnout, partly, Sarah said honestly. After 8 years of direct action operations, I was physically and emotionally exhausted. But also, I started to see how much impact really good logistics support could have on mission success. She paused, considering how much to share. During my last deployment with Delta, we had a logistics coordinator who was absolutely exceptional. This person understood our operational requirements better than we did in some cases. They anticipated needs we didn't even know we had. And they solved problems before we knew the problems existed. What happened to them? Chen asked. They got promoted and transferred to a strategic planning role at the Pentagon, and their replacement, while competent, just didn't have the same operational background. The difference in support quality was immediately noticeable. Sarah looked around at the 4 SEALs. That's when I realized that there was a real need for people who understood both sides, operations and logistics, people who could bridge that gap and help improve overall effectiveness. So you decided to become that bridge yourself, Rodriguez said. Exactly. And I have to say, it's been rewarding in ways I didn't expect. When I can help prevent a mission failure or reduce risks for people in the field, that feels just as meaningful as anything I did in direct combat. Patterson had been quiet for several minutes, clearly thinking through something. Lieutenant, can I ask you about something that's been bothering me since the cafeteria incident? Of course. When I was making those comments about desk jobs and real combat, you could have shut me down immediately by mentioning your background. Instead, you let me keep talking and digging myself deeper. Why? Sarah smiled. Because I wanted to see how far you would take it. And I wanted everyone else in that cafeteria to hear the assumptions you were making. You were teaching all of us a lesson, Johnson said with realization. I was hoping to. See, if I had immediately mentioned my combat experience, people might have thought it was just about me proving my credentials. But by letting you voice those assumptions out loud, everyone could hear how unfair and inaccurate they were. Chen nodded slowly. And it made the lesson more powerful when you finally shared your background. Right. People remember lessons better when they reach the conclusions themselves, rather than just being told what to think. Rodriguez leaned forward. Ma'am, we came here today to ask you about giving a presentation to our team about your experience, but now I'm thinking we should ask for something bigger. What do you have in mind? Would you be willing to do a broader presentation about the connection between logistics and operations? Maybe for multiple teams, not just SEALs? Patterson picked up the thought. We could invite other special operations units, maybe some conventional forces too. Help everyone understand how to work better with logistics support and how logistics can enhance operational effectiveness. Sarah considered this. That could be valuable. I'd want to include some of my logistics team members as well, so people could hear directly from the specialists who handle different types of support. Absolutely, Johnson said. The more we can break down these silos between different parts of the military, the better we'll all operate. All right, Sarah said. Let me talk to my chain of command about setting something up. It might take a few weeks to coordinate, but I think it's worth doing. The SEALs stood to leave, but Patterson hesitated at the door. Lieutenant, can I ask you one more question? Sure. Do you ever miss the direct action side of things? The adrenaline, the immediate impact, the brotherhood of combat operations? Sarah thought carefully before answering. I miss parts of it. I miss the intensity and the clarity of purpose. And I definitely miss working with some of the most dedicated and skilled people I've ever known. She paused, looking out the window at the training grounds. But I don't miss the constant stress, the physical toll, or the weight of making life-or-death decisions every day. And I've found that there's a different kind of satisfaction in this work, knowing that I'm helping dozens of teams be more effective and safer. I can understand that, Patterson said. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us today. This has been incredibly enlightening. After the SEALs left, Sarah returned to her computer and the inventory reports she had been working on earlier. But now, instead of just seeing numbers and supply schedules, she found herself thinking about the teams who would be using this equipment. She thought about what challenges they might face and how she could better prepare them for success. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed it was Commander Williams, the SEAL team leader. Lieutenant Martinez, this is Commander Williams. I understand my team paid you a visit today. Yes, sir, they did. We had a very productive conversation about logistics and operations integration. Good. I wanted to thank you for how you handled the situation in the cafeteria earlier this week. Patterson told me what happened, and frankly, it was a wake-up call for all of us. Sarah was surprised by the commander's directness. Sir, I hope there won't be any negative consequences for Petty Officer Patterson. He was professional about apologizing and learning from the situation. No negative consequences, Williams assured her. But there will be some positive changes. We're implementing new procedures to ensure my team has better communication with support departments, starting with logistics. I'm glad to hear that, sir. I'm also told you might be willing to do a presentation about logistics and operations integration. Yes, sir. I think it could be beneficial for multiple units. Excellent. I'll coordinate with other team leaders and we'll set something up. I want my people to understand how to be better partners with the support elements that make their missions possible. After ending the call, Sarah reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. What had started as an uncomfortable confrontation in a cafeteria had evolved into genuine learning opportunities and improved cooperation between different parts of the military. She realized that her transition from combat operations to logistics had given her more than just a new career path. It had given her a unique perspective on how different elements of military service connected and supported each other. And now, she had the opportunity to share that perspective with others, potentially making everyone more effective. As she returned to her work, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her mission had evolved, but it was no less important than anything she had done in her combat years. She was still serving her country and supporting her fellow service members, just in a different way. 2 weeks later, the base's largest auditorium was filled to capacity. Sarah Martinez stood at the side of the stage, reviewing her presentation notes one final time, as military personnel from across the installation continued to file into the remaining seats. What had started as a simple request from a SEAL team had grown into a major interdepartmental education event. Colonel Thompson approached her backstage. Lieutenant, I have to say, the response to this presentation has exceeded all expectations. We have representatives from every major unit on base, plus several people from other installations who heard about it through the network. Sarah looked out at the audience through a gap in the curtain. She could see Navy SEALs, Marine Force recon teams, Army Rangers, Air Force Special Operations, and dozens of support personnel from logistics, intelligence, medical, communications, and maintenance departments. The diversity of uniforms and rank insignia was impressive. Sir, I hope this lives up to the expectations, Sarah said. I've never presented to this large an audience before. You'll do fine, Colonel Thompson assured her. Just remember, these people are here because they want to learn. The cafeteria incident opened a lot of eyes about the assumptions we make about each other's roles and contributions. As Sarah took the stage, the auditorium quickly quieted. She looked out at hundreds of faces, many of which she recognized from around the base. In the front rows, she could see Patterson and his SEAL teammates. along with several other special operations personnel she had worked with indirectly through equipment requests and mission support. "Good afternoon," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "3 weeks ago, I was sitting in the base cafeteria eating lunch when a Navy SEAL decided to educate me about the difference between real military service and desk jobs." This drew chuckles from the audience, particularly from those who had heard about the cafeteria incident through the base's efficient rumor network. That conversation, which started with some unfair assumptions and ended with mutual respect and learning, made me realize something important. We all serve in the same military, on the same team, working toward the same goals. But too often, we operate in separate silos without really understanding how our different roles connect and support each other. Sarah clicked to her first slide, which showed a diagram of interconnected military functions. Today, I want to talk about those connections. I want to share some stories about how logistics, intelligence, medical support, communications, and combat operations can work together more effectively. And I want to hear from some of you about your own experiences and insights. She paused, looking around the auditorium. But first, let me ask a question. How many people in this room have ever had a mission or operation that went perfectly according to plan? A few hands went up tentatively, then came back down as people reconsidered the question. Eventually, no hands remained raised, and the audience laughed. "Exactly," Sarah said. "Military operations rarely go according to plan. Equipment breaks, intelligence changes, weather doesn't cooperate, timelines shift, and unexpected complications arise constantly. The question isn't whether you'll face challenges, it's how well you'll adapt when those challenges occur." She clicked to the next slide, which showed a mission timeline with multiple crisis points marked. "This is from a real operation I participated in during my time with Army Special Operations. I've changed the specific details for security reasons, but the basic structure and challenges are accurate." Sarah walked through the timeline, explaining how an initially straightforward mission had encountered one complication after another. Equipment failures, changed intelligence, weather delays, and unexpected enemy activity had forced constant adaptations to the original plan. "By the time we completed this operation," she said, "almost nothing was happening according to our original timeline or procedures. But the mission succeeded because we had excellent support from people who understood both our operational requirements and the flexibility needed to adapt to changing circumstances." She clicked to a slide showing photographs of various military personnel. The success of this mission depended on a logistics specialist who could rapidly source replacement equipment when our primary gear failed, an intelligence analyst who could provide real-time updates as the situation evolved, a communications specialist who maintained contact despite equipment problems, a medical team that could adapt their support plan when our extraction was delayed. Sarah looked out at the audience. Every one of these support specialists had to make decisions that directly affected the safety and success of our combat team. They weren't just following predetermined procedures, they were thinking tactically and adapting their support to meet changing operational needs. A hand went up in the audience. Sarah recognized the person as a staff sergeant from the intelligence department. "Ma'am, could you give us a specific example of how intelligence support adapted during that operation?" "Absolutely," Sarah said. "Our original intelligence indicated that the target location would be lightly defended. But as we moved into position, our surveillance detected significantly more enemy personnel than expected." She clicked to a tactical map. "Our intelligence analyst, working with updated satellite imagery and communications intercepts, quickly determined that an unrelated enemy unit had moved into the area for reasons that had nothing to do with our target." "How did that change your approach?" asked someone from the Marine detachment. "It completely changed our approach," Sarah replied. "Instead of a quick direct action raid, we had to shift to a much more complex operation that avoided the additional enemy forces while still achieving our objective." Sarah clicked through several more slides showing the revised plan. Our intelligence specialist worked with our team leader to identify alternative approach routes, timing windows when the additional forces would be least alert, and contingency extraction points in case we encountered problems. But here's the key point, she continued. This wasn't just a matter of the intelligence specialist providing us with updated information. They had to understand our tactical capabilities, our equipment limitations, and our timeline constraints. They had to think like operators, not just like analysts. Another hand went up from the communications section. Lieutenant, how did communications support adapt to the changing situation? Great question, Sarah said. Our original communications plan assumed we would be in the target area for about 2 hours. When the situation changed and we had to extend our timeline, we started running into battery life issues with our radio equipment. She clicked to a slide showing radio frequency charts. Our communications specialist realized this problem before we did and proactively established relay stations using different equipment to extend our operational communications window. Sarah looked directly at the communications personnel in the audience. But again, this required tactical thinking, not just technical expertise. Our comms specialist had to understand how our revised plan would affect communication requirements and solve problems before they became critical. Patterson raised his hand from the front row. Ma'am, what about logistics support? How did they adapt to the changing situation? Sarah smiled, remembering their conversation in her office. Logistics had to adapt in several ways. First, when we shifted from a quick raid to an extended operation, our ammunition and supply requirements changed significantly. She clicked to a slide showing equipment modifications. Our logistics coordinator arranged for additional supplies to be pre-positioned at our new extraction point. They also modified our equipment loadout to include items we might need for the extended timeline. More importantly, Sarah continued, when one of our team members was wounded during the operation, logistics had to coordinate with medical support to ensure we had appropriate evacuation equipment and medical supplies available at our extraction point. A voice called out from the medical section. How much advance notice did medical have for the evacuation planning? About 30 minutes, Sarah replied. Which meant our medical team had to rapidly assess what type of care might be needed, what equipment to have ready, and how to coordinate with the evacuation aircraft. She clicked to a slide showing medical evacuation procedures. Our medics couldn't just follow standard protocols because this wasn't a standard situation. They had to think tactically about how to provide the best possible care under uncertain and rapidly changing circumstances. Colonel Thompson stood up from his seat in the front row. Lieutenant, I think what you're describing is something we need to better understand across all our departments. Could you elaborate on what you mean by thinking tactically in support roles? Sarah nodded. Sir, I think tactical thinking in support roles means understanding that your job isn't just to follow procedures or provide requested services. Your job is to understand the operational context, anticipate problems, and provide solutions that enhance mission success. She clicked to a new slide showing a comparison chart. For example, a logistics specialist who thinks tactically doesn't just fill equipment requests. They analyze those requests to understand what the requesting unit is trying to accomplish, what challenges they might face, and what additional support might be helpful. Sarah gestured toward the SEAL section of the audience. When Petty Officer Patterson's team requested night vision equipment, I didn't just provide what they asked for. I considered the training scenario they described and provided additional equipment that would work better in their specific environment. That's exactly the kind of tactical thinking we need more of, Colonel Thompson said. How do we develop that mindset across different departments? I think it starts with better communication between operational units and support departments, Sarah replied. Too often, support requests are handled through formal channels without any direct communication between the people who need the support and the people providing it. She clicked to a slide showing organizational charts. What if we created more opportunities for direct interaction? What if logistics personnel could observe training exercises to better understand equipment usage? What if intelligence analysts could participate in mission planning discussions to better understand information requirements? A hand went up from the maintenance department. Lieutenant, how would this apply to maintenance support? We usually just get equipment that needs to be fixed. Excellent question, Sarah said. Tactical thinking in maintenance might mean understanding not just what needs to be fixed, but when it needs to be operational and what performance standards are critical for specific missions. She clicked to a slide showing maintenance timelines. For example, if a helicopter needs maintenance before a high-priority mission, a tactically thinking maintenance team considers not just the technical requirements, but also the mission timeline, backup equipment availability, and performance standards needed for that specific operation. They might identify potential problems before they become critical, suggest preventive maintenance that could avoid mission delays, or prioritize certain repairs based on operational requirements rather than just maintenance schedules. The questions and discussion continued for another hour, with personnel from every department sharing their perspectives and experiences. Sarah was impressed by how engaged everyone was and how many practical ideas emerged from the conversation. As the presentation wound down, Colonel Thompson returned to the stage. I want to thank Lieutenant Martinez for sharing her insights and facilitating this discussion. But more importantly, I want everyone here to think about how we can implement these ideas in our daily work. He looked out at the audience. Starting next week, we're going to begin implementing some new procedures designed to improve communication and collaboration between operational units and support departments. Sarah was surprised by this announcement, as she hadn't been told about any new procedures. Colonel Thompson continued, "We're going to establish regular liaison meetings between operational units and their primary support elements. We're going to create opportunities for support personnel to observe training exercises and for operational personnel to better understand support capabilities and limitations. Most importantly," he said, "we're going to change how we evaluate success in support roles. Instead of just measuring whether procedures were followed correctly, we're going to evaluate whether support enhanced operational effectiveness." The auditorium erupted in applause. As people began to file out, many stopped to speak with Sarah personally. She found herself fielding questions, accepting invitations to visit different departments, and scheduling follow-up conversations. Patterson and his team were among the last to approach her. "Lieutenant," he said, "I want you to know that this presentation has completely changed how our team thinks about working with support personnel." Rodriguez nodded in agreement. "We're already implementing some of these ideas. We've scheduled meetings with our primary logistics and intelligence contacts to better understand how we can work together more effectively." "That's wonderful to hear," Sarah said. "And I hope you know that the door is always open for these kinds of conversations." Chen smiled. "Actually, ma'am, we have a proposal for you." "Oh?" "We'd like to invite you to observe one of our training exercises," Johnson said. "Not to evaluate or critique, but to see how we currently operate and to identify opportunities where better logistics coordination might enhance our effectiveness." Sarah was intrigued. "I'd be very interested in that opportunity. It would help me understand your operational requirements much better." As the SEAL team headed toward the exit, Patterson turned back. "Lieutenant, I want to say something. 3 weeks ago, I thought I understood what military service and teamwork meant. I was wrong. You've taught me, taught all of us, that being an effective team member means understanding and respecting everyone's contributions. Thank you, Petty Officer Patterson. I think we've all learned something important about working together more effectively." After everyone had left, Sarah remained on the stage for a few minutes, looking out at the empty auditorium. She thought about how much had changed since that day in the cafeteria when she had simply wanted to eat lunch in peace. Colonel Thompson approached her as she gathered her materials. "Lieutenant, that was outstanding. You've started something important here today." Thank you, sir. I hope the new procedures you mentioned will help institutionalize some of these ideas. They will, he assured her. But I also wanted to talk to you about something else. I've been in touch with some colleagues at other installations who are interested in having similar presentations. Would you be willing to take this program to other bases? Sarah considered this. Sir, I think that could be valuable. But I'd want to modify the approach based on what we learn from implementing these changes here first. Absolutely. Let's see how things develop over the next few months. Then we can discuss expanding the program. As Sarah walked back to her office, she reflected on the unexpected direction her career had taken. 6 months ago, she had seen her transition to logistics as a step away from the action and excitement of military service. Now she realized it had given her a different but equally important mission. She was still serving her country and supporting her fellow service members. She was still solving complex problems and making decisions that affected mission success. But instead of leading combat operations, she was helping to build better teamwork and understanding across the entire military organization. That evening, Sarah updated her personal journal, something she had done regularly since her early days in combat operations. She wrote about the presentation, the audience response, and her thoughts about the changes that might result. But mostly, she wrote about the satisfaction of seeing people from different departments begin to understand and respect each other's contributions. She wrote about the potential for improved cooperation and effectiveness across the entire base. As she finished writing, Sarah realized that her story had come full circle. She had started her military career focused on individual excellence and unit cohesion within small elite teams. Now, she was working to build cohesion and excellence across much larger, more diverse military organizations. Both missions were important. Both required dedication, skill, and commitment, and both contributed to the larger goal of military effectiveness and national security. The next morning, Sarah returned to her office to find her email inbox filled with messages from personnel across the base. Some were asking follow-up questions from the presentation. Others were proposing new collaboration initiatives. Several were simply expressing appreciation for the insights she had shared. As she began working through the messages, Sarah smiled. The cafeteria incident that had started with misunderstanding and disrespect had evolved into genuine learning and improved cooperation. It reminded her that sometimes the most important battles weren't fought with weapons, but with patience, understanding, and the willingness to bridge differences between people on the same team. Her phone rang, and she saw it was a call from the Pentagon. As she answered, Sarah wondered what new opportunities might be emerging from the changes that had begun with a simple lunch conversation in a military cafeteria.